All right, great. Well, it's a real delight to welcome you to this edition of Lunch with Friends and Strangers. We're live. Look, I'm touching you. We're live here in the Keenan Music Building with Robert Buxton, pianist extraordinaire who's already done such great work with us on Chopin, on Vienna, and we hope to do a lot more. And I talked to Robert when we last did the gig, and I said, is there anybody that you think we might want to highlight and introduce to our people out there? And we said, well, there's not just one person, but there are two people, in fact, right? So we're here, of course. Before we begin, I want to thank, of course, our sponsors, the Cotton Merker Group and Morgan Stanley, the General Alumni Association, our partner in producing and promoting programs, Carolina Meadows, and of course the North Caroliniana Society. I want to thank Paul Benici over there. I can see him in the corner, and we did a lot of work in this beautiful facility to get this piano set up and whatnot. So thank you, Paul, and thank you, Vicki, back at the base for watching us. And welcome, all of you. This is a real delight. Our Friends with Strangers are already on the screen. Why don't you tell us who we're looking at?
Oh, we're looking at William Grant Still on the left and Florence Price on the right.
So, Robert, why did you pick these two people as someone that you thought that we should talk about?
Well, for me, it's part of a bigger interest in American composers. And I think American composers are almost criminally underrepresented in America, and elsewhere too. And we hear a lot of Copland, a lot of Gershwin, as we should, because they're geniuses, and But there are many, many others, and Florence Price and William Grant Still are two composers who are part of that. And yeah.
And they're of course African American composers, and so they fit in a very important place in American music, because American music, of course, is heavily indebted to the African American influences from Africa, influences from the African American experience.
Yeah.
What is it? Is there something in particular that they bring to? Classical is the word we use, right?
Yeah,
So what is it that they bring to? I guess you would say orchestral music, or to more compositional music. What is it special that they are bringing to it that we might hear and talk about a little bit today?
Yeah, so and I think with just that word classical, you hit on something. What does it really mean?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of difference between the guys with the powdered wigs and someone like, Bartok. I mean, it's so different. So we could call it just written, notated performance music.
Performance music.
Ellington, I've heard people say Duke Ellington's one of the greatest, and he is one of the greatest American composers. But so much of what he did, for example, involves improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're doing, Florence Price and William Grant Still, is they're writing in these forms associated with that word classical. I mean, we don't need to get to the semantics, I guess, and what they bring is, I was thinking about this about American composers, and I put them in a general set of three categories. One I call uptown, the other is downtown. That's maybe for another presentation. But the third is populist, or folk influence.
And what distinguishes those three schools?
Yeah, and they're just, placeholders. I don't think the composers wake up in the morning and say, I'm an uptowner or a downtowner. So, Copland is a populist.
Mm-hmm.
Like Still and Price, that he uses these European forms to, where's the camera? I'm just curious.
The camera's right there. Hi there, camera.
Yeah.
I'm going to do one other thing for you, too, as I realize we might have a hard time hearing you, but there we go. Yeah, this is what we call improvisation, folks. You seeing this? So uptown, so populist would be what we consider Copland, and I can understand that. And how about the uptown and downtown? What's this?
Yeah, uptown would be those who followed 12-tone serialism. Like, they followed in the footsteps of Schoenberg and Weber.
Okay.
They would work at the uptown institutions like Columbia, Juilliard, and they wrote, like Elliott Carter was one, or Charles Wuorinen, called academic music. Some of it's very good.
It's very theoretical.
Exactly,
and sort of pushing boundaries and trying to find new ways of expression outside of old forms with theory and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. But the downtown would be people who wrote music for like art galleries downtown, and Philip Glass is probably the most famous one. John Cage. There's a sort of almost like a hippie, ethos to that. But I guess today what we're talking about is the populists, and so there's Copland, there's Roy Harris, there's William Schumann, who wrote I think it was a ballet with the subject of baseball. I mean, you don't get
Yeah.
more, Americana than that. And, William Grant Still, Florence Price, their pieces, even the titles of them, they just have this Americana theme. Of course, yes, specifically African American experience, and specifically even more Southern. They're both from the Deep South, yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's. I mean, here's an interesting picture. You can see we were talking about it's written music, right?
Yeah.
So this is. I assume that were they raised in traditions where they might have been exposed to improvisational music and into improvisational forms, and singing in terms of. I mean, that's very common in African American music. So I assume that is the context that they came out of.
Oh yeah, and that music is really the basis of what they wrote. I mean, that's what fed their artistic inspiration.
So the populist form, you might say, is both a matter of the subject matter that you're choosing to write about and the influences that you're allowing to enter into the music, right?
Exactly.
Can you
steal that from you?
I like that. There you go. We're good with words here. Let's get to Florence because she's older, right?
Yeah,
I said we looked here. She was born in 1887. What can you tell us? Do you know anything about her background, early life?
Yeah, and it's funny, both of them have ties, curiously, to Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah. I only drove through there a couple times. But yeah, she's older. She's born in Little Rock. She is, especially, and I have to say that not only being African American, but being female, she faced so many barriers, which is just unthinkable. And it's really wonderful.
In this era, especially, right?
In this era, of course, today too, but the barriers then, I mean, especially. And I forget exactly where she studied, but she did her studies. She studied with George Chadwick at some point.
I have a picture here of the New England Conservatory of Music.
And
so
Chadwick is a Boston, So she got, and Chadwick is kind of maybe a precursor to the populists, I would say.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that she might have been an outlier at the New England Conservatory of Music in this particular time. So, how did that? Do you know how she ended up there, or what was demonstrating such great skill? She obviously had some training in Little Rock.
Oh yeah, she had, and I was drawing a blank, but it just came to me. African Americans were not allowed to go to the New England Conservatory, and I read that she hid that. She changed her name or something, and she pretended that she was Mexican.
Wow.
So,
wow. Yeah, exactly. Talk about barriers and overcoming barriers, right? So, she. When do we begin to get notoriety, and when did she enter into the music consciousness of sort of people are beginning to understand the name and the reception? What kind of reception did her music have?
Well, I think both she and Still did not get the recognition that they deserved in their life, and particularly Florence Price. William Grant Still did conduct some orchestras. He had an opera production. Florence Price did not. She had a difficult first marriage. She got divorced, and then I think she married a second time. But she lived in Chicago, and I think she lived a pretty low-key life, and she taught a lot. She composed a lot of music. I think recently somebody found boxes of her music in an abandoned house somewhere, maybe in Chicago, but I may be wrong.
And is this composing music for the sake of composing, or was she shopping these songs to people to perform? And I mean, it sounds almost like Emily Dickinson, right? But was she actively engaged in shopping her music and selling her music, and who was performing her music, and was it challenging for her to get performed?
Well, she did win this prize, the Wanamaker Prize in Philadelphia, I think, for her symphony, which was played by an orchestra. But as I understand, she wasn't quite as, much of a hermit as Emily Dickinson. No, but I think she didn't get the performances that she deserved. And today, there's a reconsideration of that. A lot of people are playing her music now in the last, 5-10 years. So I would say that it wasn't enough.
So within the realm of music and within the realm of what she was doing, and where you have this general category of populist, but can you talk about some themes or some particular things that make her music stand out or particularly distinctive?
Yeah. Well, I think both of these composers, to me, it's music of the rural Deep South. And the pieces that I'm going to play, one of the pieces I'm going to play by her is It's from a set called Dances in the Cane Brakes. And cane brakes are these marshes, these swamps,
Sure.
the Mississippi River. And there's also, there's an influence of ragtime, I think. It's a little bit. Scott Joplin was also
Sure.
from Arkansas, so
Yeah.
there's that. And, I think that just as an equivalent, I mean, we're probably Gershwin is more familiar. So Gershwin, I call him the music of New York.
Yeah.
And there's a influence of 1920s jazz. I mean, you read The Great Gatsby, that's Gershwin right there.
Sure, yeah.
And so I'm trying to think of a literary equivalent here. For Florence Price, it might be someone, well, Maya Angelou is from Arkansas, and maybe William Faulkner is from Mississippi. And, you compare Fitzgerald and Faulkner, Angelou, there's a different flavor.
I love it.
So
No,
that's
absolutely.
the musical equivalent, I think.
So in the 1920s, and so 1887.
Right,
we're 20 years old by 1907. We're
Yeah.
40 years old at her time. So do you know when she was writing the most and when she was most prolific? And did her music change in ways? Because there's a big difference between Scott Joplin and the music that's being played in the 1920s. Do you see that in Florence Price's compositions? An evolution?
Yes and no. I think she's one of those composers who had her voice pretty early, and she stuck to it, and she wrote a lot throughout her life. That's my take on it. And those Dances in the Cane Brakes, it's the last thing she wrote, which, by the way, they're very joyful pieces. And
So what year would this be?
That was
the very end of her life?
1953, the year
Wow.
she died.
Wow.
And it has a little Scott Joplin. So she's, I would say, more old school, more conservative than Still.
Okay.
Because, the years they were born, Still was actually participating in 20s and 30s jazz.
Yes.
I mean, he was in we'll talk about it, But Florence Price is more, she's older.
Yeah.
She's actually more 19th century in a way.
Really interesting. Really interesting. Well, I have this wonderful picture here.
yeah.
She is a third over from the left, Florence Price, and just gives you a sense of, this society that we don't know enough about in white America.
Yeah.
That African American. You see affluence here. You also see. So I don't know exactly. This is a party in honor of Moyd R. George, and I will verify that it is hard to find any pictures of Florence Price.
That's true.
Yeah, so I was really doing quite a hunt for some of
She had
these.
a pretty private life. I mean,
And so, but in terms of performance, so as I did a little bit of research for this, I came across this person as well, Margaret Bonds, who I understood performed some of Florence Price's music.
Yeah.
Can you maybe we can use Margaret Bonds to give a little context to the world in which Florence Price was making her music, and who was playing it, and when were they playing it? What can you say about the relationship that they might have had, and maybe what you know about Margaret Bonds?
Well, I don't know much or enough about Margaret Bonds. I think at some point she was a student of Florence Price. I read that when Florence Price was going through a divorce, she lived with Margaret Bonds for a time.
Okay.
So I don't. Margaret Bonds is another composer I want to play. I want to learn. There's a really great pianist I've been in touch with on and off. She teaches in California. Her name's Althea Waits.
Okay.
And she's a magnificent pianist that plays with the most lyrical, beautiful sound. And she has done recordings of music by Price, by Bonds, by many names that I don't know, many African-American composers I don't know.
All doing written music in this, not the improvisational music, but more in this strain of written.
Oh yeah.
With classical.
Right, the classical music. Right. And all to say is that even though these people did not get enough recognition in their lifetimes, there was a whole scene of this music, and there still is. And it's almost, it's like an underground scene. It's like the downtown composers, which Philip Glass came out. There was a whole music scene in the African-American community.
With so many doors closed to access to the formal training in this, a scene still develops. With people who get formal training, either, do some of these conservatories open up eventually, or we have to wait all the way until the Civil Rights era before we have, African Americans being let into places like the New England Conservatory?
I believe that's the case. I mean, I don't exactly know, but that'd be an interesting thing to learn about. But these things took time, and they're still taking time. And, it's just to say the bigger the bigger picture is that it's nowadays, we're reconsidering a lot of things. I was thinking this morning when I was a kid, I had this flip book. It was really great, and it was called The Great Composers. And it started with Vivaldi, and it ended with Britten, who died in 1970.
Sure.
And it was just the big names. And at that time, and for a long time, I didn't know that there were composers before Vivaldi. I thought that music just didn't.
Monteverdi, none of those.
I've never heard it, not in that book. And then I thought that music, people stopped writing music when Benjamin Britten died. And,
Some people might still believe that,
well,
right?
that's kind of that's what the canon does. And the canon is convenient because it gives us a framework. But honestly, and I don't mean to, I love all those composers, like a lot. But that's about, when you start digging, that's about this much.
Yeah. And let me just guess, the profile of all of these people probably look the same and look very much like you and I look.
Yeah, well, older.
Different hairstyles, right?
Yeah, different hair, more longer and more bald.
I'm going for lists. I don't know if you noticed this.
you're
Yeah,
going
I'm
for
kind of
lists,
going
right?
a little bit.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean...
You know what I'd like to do? I'd like to hear some Florence Price.
boy.
And I think, why don't we play a little Florence Price and we'll see what it does to us and see what kind of conversation we can have about the way this wonderful music sounds.
Yeah, that'll spur more talk. And yeah, and I just recommend everyone to go to YouTube. Just there's so many recordings of things. And
great.
Yeah.
So this again, the piece is the Cambridge. Tell us about the piece, 1953. Was it performed? I mean, can you give us a sense of
that she wrote it as a piano piece, and they were friends with William Grant Still, her colleagues, and I'd say Still had more of a profile as in the wider musical, American musical scene. He orchestrated these pieces.
Oh, okay.
You could find that on YouTube. So he arranged it for orchestra, I think, right after Price died, and I think that is how that piece got out there. But the funny thing is, I could not find the sheet music for this.
Oh, really?
I could not find it anywhere. And a lot of these pieces, and these composers we're speaking about, Bonds, Price, you can't just go on Amazon and find it, or to a store. So I went to YouTube comments. This is crazy. I was really desperate. And I was reading and
He did this for you, folks.
Yeah, I did this. You see what I do? I mean, it's just YouTube. I didn't, fly anywhere, but...
all the best research is on YouTube,
yes,
I understand, right? Just
YouTube University. No,
some research is okay on YouTube, folks. Go ahead.
So, no, it's not a conspiracy theory. So, and this one comment, there was a guy, he wrote, I have the sheet music, because people were looking for it. And I wrote to him, and he immediately sent it to me. And I'd been looking for weeks for this. And it has his signature. It says, he's a head auto mechanic somewhere in East Texas.
What?
I mean,
there you go. Isn't that the power of music?
The power of music and the power of the internet in a good way.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to find these things. I mean,
So you're going to give us the original piano piece from which the arrangement that maybe is more well known by William Grant Still. Well, this is fantastic. Without further ado, Robert Buxton, take it away.
Right.
While you do that.
And the title of this specific dance is Nimble Feet.
Nimble Feet.
It's a dance, and it has, this is a thought I had. I haven't been able to back this up with, research, but it also has a Caribbean or even a Cuban flavor to it. I wonder if she spent time in New Orleans, because New Orleans is that melting pot where there's, Afro-Caribbean influences there. I feel those rhythms too. And the sense of that. I played some Cuban music before, and there's a similarity. I don't know if it's conscious. Nimble Feet, it's a dance, and I do not have nimble feet. Hopefully my fingers will be nimble.
I know they will be.
All
right, take it away, Robert Buxton. Hey, very nice, very nice, excellent. What a playful song, right? It has this wonderful playfulness at the beginning. There's an interesting theme in the middle there where it gets a little bit dark or something.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit musically what's happening there?
Yeah, well, it just goes, it's an E major
Yeah,
right here, and then it goes to E minor.
that's what I heard.
Yeah. And it's like the clouds cover the sun
Yeah.
for a little bit. It's joyful. Yeah, it's a joyful piece, and it's amazing that she wrote this right before she died. Think about how many composers write a requiem before they
Sure.
go.
And this is a playful piece. You could dance to it. It
Oh, yeah,
really
well,
has
it's a
got.
dance, yeah.
So tell me where you hear the Latin rhythms, and is that in your left hand that you're hearing those rhythms?
Well, it's both. I mean, yeah, well, I guess, yeah, it's Latin, it's
You got a little
African,
ragtime in there.
little ragtime, yeah.
Really interesting. How does this piece, are there pieces that are very different by Florence as well? And where does
yeah.
this fit? So she has pieces that are more minor in feel. Does she have pieces that would bring up the Requiem vibe, if you will?
Yeah,
or-
the piano sonata,
Yeah.
which is in E minor, and it's I don't have it on me, but that's a much more it's a darker piece, and it sounds more in the vein of like Brahms or a European
Yeah.
composer. Yeah,
But you're
And-
saying she's has less of the jazz influence. That
Yeah.
has that
But that
influence,
had it,
though.
and-
That has it,
and
right?
for her pieces, that's particularly has that.
Yeah.
Has that kind of populist, if we want to call it that. It has that
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah.
And so when did William Grant Still, he arranged it, and so this became an orchestrated piece.
Yeah.
And how many of these dances are in the whole piece?
It's 3.
There's 3. Okay, so the whole piece is what? How long about?
Yeah, about 12 minutes maybe total.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this did get performed.
Yeah.
And the reception of William Grant Still's was that well received, and did that help with Florence Price's? I mean, it's a shame because I assume this happened after she died, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
did that help bring her into the limelight some, or?
I don't know if it did much.
Yeah.
I mean, I think really it's now people are looking to composers like them and others. And I think that, for a long time, it's that flip book I had.
Yeah,
That was, if you weren't in that group,
yeah,
then,
yeah, really interesting. Well, let's
So-
want to talk about William Grant Still.
Sure,
I'm going to go
yeah.
back. Bear with me, folks, to remind you that William Grant Still was born a little bit after, in 1895. Now, what do we know about early life of William Grant Still?
Yeah, he was born in Woodville, Mississippi, and he relocated at some point to Little Rock.
Okay,
like,
yep, the Arkansas connection.
Yep, and he did move all around. I mean, he studied in Ohio.
Yeah, I got
and-
some pictures here of
Two
where he
universities.
studied. So at the Wilberforce Historically Black College. And I was
Yeah.
just looking at the names of the people who went there. I noticed that he's listed second,
Mm-hmm.
right after Leontine Price. Of course, also a famous musician
Oh, yeah.
and operatic singer. And so many great names. I don't know if you can see those on the screen there, folks, but a lot of distinguished Wilberforcians. So he went there. He also went to the Oberlin Conservatory of Music. I just have a sense, just knowing the history of Oberlin, that this might have been a more welcoming environment for him, or
Perhaps.
perhaps.
Yeah, that I don't know, but possibly. Yeah.
Do you know who he studied with?
I know. Yeah. At some point, he did study, I think, with Chadwick.
Again,
who
also with Chadwick.
Price studied, but most importantly, I think he privately studied with Edgar Varese,
Oh,
who
wow.
was, this
Sure.
experimental French composer
Yeah.
who wrote even.
He
like-
would be a downtown composer for Rez?
maybe
Yeah.
or an up. Well, yeah,
Or
something
uptown,
in
yeah,
between.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
'Cause I know Pierre Boulez. Pierre Boulez would be uptown. I mean,
Okay.
Pierre Boulez loved his music. But yeah, I mean, he studied with Varese, and Varese encouraged him to, because it's funny, because if you hear Varese's music, it's a piece called Amérique by him, and it's
Sure.
for percussion. I think that's the piece. Very wild stuff. It has the sounds of sirens. It's very modernistic. William Grant Still is not quite that.
Yeah.
Apparently, he told William Grant Still, "You have a natural lyrical gift. Go with that."
Oh, really? Like,
So-
don't try to be experimental, or
just-
just you go with what's inside of you and the musicality that's inside of you.
Yeah.
So he's, and again, sort of placing these people in time. So he's going to be in his 30s by the 1920s. So
Yes.
through the early period, was he influenced by ragtime as well early on in his playing? Because if you're learning piano, if you're born in 1895, some of the most popular music that you'd be learning on piano would be Scott Joplin tunes, I imagine, at this point.
Probably, yeah.
And
for
so,
sure.
and then he goes on to embrace jazz a little bit more.
Oh yeah,
So
and jazz and blues. You know, he was in the W.C. Handy band as an
I
arranger.
think I have a picture
Oh, there,
here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, skipping over. But yeah, he was an arranger,
Yeah.
and
okay.
many people got their start doing arranging for these bands. It's later big bands. I think he was also an arranger for Artie Shaw.
Oh wow.
At some
Okay.
point. And you know, well, that's Glenn Miller
So-
was an arranger too. Yeah.
So is this the skill that they have? Because these are people who are skilled at writing music.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's just a matter of saying, we've got this great tune,
Uh-huh.
and we need someone to score this out for a band.
Yeah.
And so he was able to do that. He's also, I noticed in here, he's also a multi-instrumentalist.
Oh yeah, he
From a-
played the violin and piano and a few other things. Maybe bass. It looks like. Is that?
Yeah, it looks like, I don't know what he's got in his hand there, but I found, again, there's very hard to find pictures of these two composers, and we
Yeah.
do hope that more of them surface and will be available for the public. How important is it to play the instruments that you arrange for? Because I assume that some composers don't play every single instrument
No,
that they're
they-
writing out. So what does that do for a composer when you're writing in music in instruments that you're intimately familiar with how they work?
I think it can only help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the more instruments you play, as in the case of William Grant Still, do you have a sense of how many instruments he played?
At least three. I mean,
At least
yeah,
three,
At least
okay.
three. Yeah.
How many instruments do you play,
I
Rob?
play the piano. I can play the kazoo too.
All right, good. Well, next time we'll
That's
do all of these songs on kazoo. I think that'll be the next
well,
step.
it's the Baroque. I play the Baroque kazoo.
Yeah, bro. Of
I'm
course,
joking,
exactly.
I'm
Of
joking.
course. So now let's now talk about him entering into the music scene.
Yeah.
When does he have more notoriety in his life than Florence Price does?
I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah, and so and you mentioned, doing all this arrangement for people that had good steady gigs and good work. W.C. Handy, Artie Shaw, these are big names. So does this start in the 1920s for him, and 1930s?
20s and 30s, and he did a few other names. Paul Whiteman. And
I don't know Paul Whiteman.
Yeah,
so.
he had this big orchestra, and it was not really a big band. It was like a precursor to big band music.
So this would be in the 20s.
In
I
the
assume.
20s, yeah, and the 30s, and just Gershwin's original version of Rhapsody in Blue was written for Paul Whiteman.
Okay.
I think it was a band they called it, or the orchestra.
Yeah.
Paul Whiteman Orchestra, and this piece I'm going to play one from a set. The set is called A Deserted Plantation, and the second movement I'm going to play is called Young Missy, and that's from a set that's it's for Paul Whiteman, the orchestra, and it straddles popular and more classical. We can use that word.
So
you know,
more
kinda-
popular and uptown or downtown?
Maybe it's before that
Oh,
category. yeah.
okay, before he's
Maybe
got.
too
One
early.
question about both these composers, and in particular because William Grant Still seemed to be sort of more immersed in the active
Yeah.
professional music playing scenes. I mean, where was he based when he was doing most of his work? In
Oh, yeah.
Chicago, or was he in New York? Or
At this time, he was in New York, and yeah, he was a kind of a big part of the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, he was friendly with many other figures in that, and he wrote many operas throughout his life. Some of them, the libretti, are by Langston Hughes.
Oh wow. Okay.
So he is kind of the composer of the Harlem Renaissance, we could call
Oh,
it.
that's fascinating.
So
How about recorded music? Do we have recordings of him playing?
I haven't, I
Yeah.
haven't found it. I have to look more. I heard an
Yeah.
interview of his,
Oh, okay.
but no, I don't know.
Because he's mostly known as a composer
Yeah.
and not a performer himself. But
Right.
I assume that he's performing in these in these particular
Yeah.
guises here. So, but no, there isn't a lot of recorded music by him to sort of go on.
Yeah.
How did he get along with the other? If he's in New York, I mean, did he know Copland? Did he know the other great composers at the time? And did he have a relationship with them?
That I'm not quite sure. I think I do know that he felt, rightly so, that there was stuff holding him back. He did have a good relationship with a guy named Howard Hanson, who conducted an orchestra in Rochester and premiered a lot of works by younger composers, at that time younger. And that is where I think some of his symphonies were done. So, unlike Price, I think he got more performances in his lifetime. What happened was that eventually at some point he leaves New York and he goes to Los Angeles to do film scoring. He worked with Tiomkin mainly. He would arrange for Tiomkin, or orchestrate rather for Tiomkin. And there's some big movies, maybe The Alamo, or there's some big movies that he was the arranger for. And, with the subject of film music, many, many great composers like Korngold did film music. And in, Shostakovich in the Soviet Union, he did film music. Copland did film music. So a lot of people, Faulkner did writing screenplays.
The new medium is here, and all the other mediums can, all the other media can contribute, right?
So they all went to Hollywood, and but I think a big disappointment for him was one of his operas. I think I should have got the name straight, but I think it was Troubled Island, maybe. But in the late 40s, the New York City Opera finally did a production.
Was this the first production by an African American?
Yes. And his first symphony, played in Rochester, conducted by Howard Hanson, was the first symphony by an African American to be conducted with a major orchestra. Yeah. So, and from what I've read, the audience loved it. The critics did not praise that opera.
And what was it? What was their? Was there an implicit bias in their critique?
I'd have to probably guess that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so odd, isn't it? And that there's a bias that this music. We don't know what the critiques were.
Yeah.
We can guess that there was. I'm just going to throw this out there, folks.
Yeah.
There might have been some racism.
There might have.
And
Go figure.
And if that's the case, it's really interesting to hear. Leonard Bernstein and others are able to incorporate African American influences into their music. Aaron Copland, all of the and white composers can do this. But when an African American composer puts forward the same syncretic ideas, right?
Yep.
That they would not get the same reception.
Here's a story about that. And by the way, with no intention to discredit Bernstein, Copland, Gershwin, all of whom I love, and actually they all faced, in their own way, they faced anti-Semitism.
Yep.
Gershwin had to change his name from Gershowitz. But anyways, the story is that it may or may not be true. I've heard this, that William Grant Still was playing piano for some Broadway show in the 30s, and Gershwin was there, and he heard a tune, and the tune was "I Got Rhythm." And some people say, Still definitely believe this, that Gershwin sort of took that from him, and Still was not too happy about that. Now, my point is this: there's a quote from Stravinsky: "Good composers borrow, great composers steal."
Wow.
So. I don't want to get into
just think about
copyright.
that. In the classic and the jazz world, the rhythm changes are the backbone of so many jazz songs, right?
Yeah.
And just to think, right? I Got Rhythm. That could have been coming originally out of William Grant Still.
Yes, it probably did. I think it did.
Wow.
And the point is, it gets. I think it's too simplistic to say he ripped him off, and that's that. I think obviously Gershwin is a genius, and we need to keep doing his music. I play his music now. I love Gershwin. But I think the real crime is to not play Still.
Yeah.
Either. To say that's the crime. And we need both. And so what I tell students is in assigning repertoire, I'll talk about the repertoire, and they'll say, so that flip book, with which Gershwin is there, it needs to expand. It needs to go from, 50 people to thousands. Yeah. And there should be a note that says, and we're only scratching the surface. Yeah. So I tell my students, nowadays we have to work harder. You have to play all the guys in the flip book and more. Yeah. Because there's so much great music out there. And I don't know where that tangent came, but yeah, Still did not get the recognition that he deserved. And I was listening to his 4th and 5th symphonies last night. Incredible. He's a masterful symphonist. Wow. It's just, I guess the Gershwin, there's a similarity between them, but there's a difference. Yeah. And they're each idiosyncratic musical voices. Gershwin is the music of New York. Still is the music of Mississippi. in Arkansas. I feel it in the music. I can almost
Even
smell it.
even if he's composing in New York, he's bringing this, deep roots of those areas into his music.
Oh, yeah.
Just one little aside about those the repertoire and that really
Oh, yeah.
interesting thing you said about the flip book. I think it's interesting that if you're teaching that way as well,
Mm.
that I think a lot of folks will say, well, here's the standard that has been set by the people that were in the flip book, and now let's compare others to them and sort of place them into context.
Yeah.
A better way to do this would be to say, before we even begin to understand what the frameworks are, that the framework is created by those thousands of people as well,
Yes.
right? Because they come out of this as well. And so you can see just how much that would color, excuse the word, color our appreciation for music if we constantly say, here's the canon, and where do these people fit within that canon? Instead of saying, let's recreate the canon
Oh, no, there's
as from all of these voices.
Well, I think, and here's a couple thoughts on that, because the canon, it's just like I use those words, populist, uptown, downtown. I mean, those are generalizations. They're helpful. They're like a bookshelf. It helps to organize our thoughts. But the funny thing, take for example the 18th century. I think we talked about this in one of the previous, maybe Vienna.
Yeah,
The story of Mozart and Salieri.
sure.
And that's a story of the great genius and then the mediocre composer. That's the myth, and it's not true.
Yeah.
I listened to Salieri a lot recently. It's incredible. He has 2 piano concertos. They're incredible. Here's another thing. If we're thinking, we have the words Baroque, classical, romantic. Classical conjures up this kind of light, the minuet, that sort of thing, the galant style of Mozart, of Haydn. You listen to Salieri's operas, very brass heavy, a lot of kettle drums. It is not the same sound as a Haydn minuet. It's just not. And the question is, I start wondering, so what is he then? It gets confusing, is what I'm saying. And those neat categories, they start to not work. So Salieri, that heavy brass and kettle drums, you hear it in Beethoven.
Yeah,
He taught
that's what
Beethoven.
made me think about that. That sounds more like the out in your face sort of approach of Beethoven.
But he was one of Beethoven's major teachers.
Yeah.
And so then you say, wait a minute. And then finally, there's this thing I always, with 18th century music, that E.T.A. Hoffmann, the writer, he said that Mozart and Haydn are romantic composers. Whoa. But that made sense because William Blake lived in the 18th century, not the 19th. He's a romantic.
Sure.
So I'm just saying that
Goethe, great.
Goethe, yeah.
Absolutely, and all of the great poets of that era, right? So.
Yeah. So I don't know. It gets the terms are good placeholders, but they get things get kind of messy when.
Should we get back to William Grant still?
Sorry,
This is I find it absolutely fascinating, and it does help us to think about categories, and that's what we were talking about. One final question before we have just a little bit of the life of William Grant still. And also Florence Price, if applicable. I know she died in 1953 before we really have a burgeoning civil rights movement.
Oh, yeah.
Do we have any sense about William Grant Still's perspective on the society that he lived in and the changes that were happening in the 50s and 60s?
Ironically, I read somewhere that he was somewhat conservative. He was a McCarthy supporter at some point. However, I read he was also married a couple times. His second wife, Verna Arvey, was, I think she was either born in Russia or her parents were Russian, Russian Jewish. So, and I think that she may have been pretty left. I don't remember exactly. But Verna Arvey wrote a lot of texts for which he set to music. The point is, I read a recollection by one of his children online about William Grant Still, and this was describing him in the late 60s and the 70s. He died in the 70s, so in his late life. And that describing how he was really pretty depressed about what was going on in the country. And while we look back and we say all the progress that happened, but it was also a very painful.
We've certainly seen what progress is. We're not there, right?
And these things are going on still now. So he was deflated, and I think it's his daughter was also talking about how, some of the energy in his earlier music, it was not there in his later music. So there was a feeling of sort of reticence, of defeat, and it's really sad.
So how about composers that follow from these two? Were there, and especially in African American composers have written orchestral, quote unquote, classical music, were they considered old-fashioned? Were there new movements coming out of arrangers? And can you speak to any composers that follow William Grant Still and how they might be different and what they might be reacting to, or whether they're living on the legacy, however it's positioned?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because I think, in a way, Florence Price and William Grant Still, their musical language today would be considered very conservative, very tonal.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it has the basis of folk music and lyricism, but it's not it's not uptown or downtown. It's not those, which came up later.
Yeah.
And I'd say many of the African American composers that I know of today, David Baker, Adolphus Hailstork, and many names, they write in a style that's based on gospel blues. There's a foundation of that.
Sure.
There are composers like a guy named Julius Eastman, who was very much part of the downtown. Now, those words, uptown and downtown, they're not official terms, but I'm just using. Julius Eastman was very much a downtown composer, kind of a minimalist.
Sure.
And very radical one at that. So, but I think Julius Eastman is kind of an exception. I think that of the living African American composers that I know of, mostly I hear, it's not to say they're not experimental at times, because to be a 20th, 21st century composer means to have experimental moments.
Yeah.
But by and large, there is this kind of Americana populist thing, which I think is an advantage, because I think having folk music as a root it's a great, look at Dvorak or Tchaikovsky or Chopin, that's what they do.
So interesting, I gotta let you play,
No,
but
no,
I
I'm
gotta
sorry.
ask you.
I
Well,
love
no, it's
talking
your
to
fun.
you.
No, we're just having too much fun. And I have one other question about experimental music, because I'm thinking some of the most radical experimental music of the 1960s and 70s came out of the Black nationalist movement, where you have Coltrane, Albert Ayers, Pharoah Sanders, people like that. I just can't help but think that William Grant Still might not have appreciated that music.
Most probably not. I mean, even if you pull up a picture of him in older age, particularly, and what I read, he was a very soft-spoken man. He was probably similar in his disposition to Duke Ellington, who was called Duke he's very sophisticated and soft-spoken and aristocratic in his bearing and his nature. And I think that was William Grant Still's character too, and his music is that.
Yeah.
And actually, this piece, it might sound like a Duke Ellington improvisation at some points.
Okay. But it's not going to sound like John Coltrane's impressions.
Oh no. And maybe another time we could do I have not prepared anything experimental, doing something like that,
We got to get to that.
But maybe next time.
No, absolutely.
And John Coltrane was a composer as well.
And Alice Coltrane, a great. That makes me think of, in terms of pianists, I think of people like Cecil Taylor or someone that, who is a downtown jazz guy, if you will, right? He's doing jazz, but he's doing it in this very sort of high thinking, abstract, but also cutting edge, not. And also sort of a lot of body in the playing as well, as opposed to, I think Uptown might be more cerebral.
Yeah,
right?
much more. Yeah.
Hey, I love talking about this, but we need to hear you play some
we need
music.
to talk more after.
Absolutely.
I just love talking to you.
So tell us about the piece you're going to play for us.
Yeah, this is from a set that was, it's funny. The Florence Price was originally for piano, and Still arranged it for orchestra. This is originally an orchestra piece.
Okay.
He wrote for the Paul Whiteman.
You keep pointing at these. You want to show us what this is? So this is.
Here it is, and there's a little picture. This is also a difficult score to acquire. This thing.
I'm going to bring it up to the camera so we can see it a little bit closer. This is high tech. You seeing this, Paul? High tech stuff here. See,
I had to hunt to get, and I got that a long time ago. That, because I had not heard of Price until recently, but still I'd heard about when I was in college, around 2008, 2009. So, this is from a set called A Deserted Plantation.
Okay.
And it's for this. It's kind of orchestra / big band, both.
Okay.
Combo. That's what Paul Whiteman. That's how I describe him. And these are movements selected from that big work. And he arranged them for solo piano and
Okay.
published them. And there's 3 pieces in this suite. There's, I've played them all at different points. There's Spiritual, then there's Young Missy, which is the second one I'm going to play now, and then there's Dance, which is like a stride piano type thing. So,
So we're here, Missy, the second,
hear,
the second movement. Okay, well, fantastic.
and it's very lyrical. And I chose it because I think, the others are great. They're all great, but Young Missy is very emblematic of his natural musical voice. A Spiritual, he uses a spiritual tune as the basis of it. The Dance, it's an emulation of stride piano, James P. Johnson, but the middle is just him, purely him, and there are moments in his operas that sound exactly like that. So,
let's give it a listen.
Yeah.
I'm going to take
All
that
right.
from you and let you do some playing.
Thank you.
Folks, Robert Buxton. This must have been somebody special.
Oh, yeah.
That is just such a pretty. Let's put it on that
yeah.
side.
There we go.
That's such a pretty piece, and I really love the motif there at the very end, the echoing of it, the little descending pattern echoing when the right hand to the left hand. What is it? What are some elements that make up that piece that really make that piece stand out for you in terms of the chordal structure, the harmonics that are going on in there?
Well, it's never straightforward harmony, like a lot of jazz is. And again, I wouldn't call that jazz. I mean, it's it's a through composed piece, but it's these elusive harmonies. They're very lush. They're very sophisticated. Duke Ellington would do it. I remember there was a talk Leonard Bernstein gave about rock and roll music, and he praised it actually. It's really for the parents of the unruly kids. It's a 1960s interview, and he starts by talking about Duke Ellington and the harmonies, and he plays some chords, Well, that's not a Duke Ellington chord, but which one is it? Well, anyway, these kinds of things,
Those are those extensions into 13s and
right.
That's like that. Yeah, exactly.
And he said this is the music of a sophisticated generation, the Great Depression.
Yeah.
This is the music of a jazz club. It's a smoky jazz club. And he said then you have Little Richard or so. It's a different mindset.
It's nice the way that they could actually match music to the context in which it comes from and appropriate to, and that every music has a time and a place in which it's being played.
Yeah.
One thing about that piece, and this is great, I still hear some 19th century piano music in there as well. I hear a little Schumann in there, in terms of some of his slower pieces and whatnot. And I'm completely over my head by making that comparison.
I think you're right.
But absolutely beautiful. We are coming up to the end of our hour. I want to just say, if anyone has any questions, I'm going to ask Paul to go ahead and call them out for us. We do welcome any questions that you have. We also know that if you're shy, that's okay too, and you can just ask us questions later. Paul, do we have any questions at this point or comments?
Well, we got a comment from Ben about Troubled Island, the opera about the Haitian Revolution,
right,
by Still and Langston Hughes.
Yep.
And how it was performed by the New York City Opera in 1949, and then it closed after 3 performances.
Yes.
Yeah. What can you tell us about that piece? Thank you for that, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's what I was alluding to. So I got the name right. That in 1949, there was this opera put on, and from what I read, the audience loved it. But for some reason, and it's probably racism is part of it, the critics panned it. And it closed after a few.
The Haitian Revolution doesn't make white people feel very comfortable in 1949. I think that could be something.
That could be
and what
part
a
of it.
powerful thing to write about too. I thank you for that, Ben. I definitely want to look that up. I didn't know about that.
That's on YouTube.
Is it?
And you can hear. I was listening to it the other month. Really, it's beautiful music. It's really, and I think at heart he's an opera composer. He's a great opera composer. And American opera is an overlooked, except Porgy and Bess, which is great, but there's more.
Yeah.
If you like Porgy and Bess, look into William Grant Still wrote like 9 or something. I mean, it's a lot.
So sometime we could do this with a vocal accompaniment. It sounds like.
Yeah.
That sounds fantastic.
He wrote art songs. So did Florence Price. Yeah. Beautiful songs for piano and voice. It's just
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we have to do. We definitely want to hear more. Are we set with questions over there, Paul, at this point?
Any more?
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Robert, thank you. It's
Thank
such
you,
a pleasure
Max.
talking with you.
It's always a pleasure.
We ended up hitting an hour, and I'm like, I could keep going.
Me too. Well, we should after this is over. We could talk more.
Well, you're always welcome back too to do more work with us, and we absolutely our people out there love you. I want to thank you.
I love you all. Too.
Yeah, we love you.
Yes.
We have one thing I want to make an announcement. It's a bittersweet announcement, and that this will be the last of our official Lunch with Friends and Strangers. This program started during the times of COVID, when everyone was stuck inside, and it was such a great thing to be able to have these conversations. We are so grateful for all of you who are here today watching it, but we've noticed that this time for us is probably not the most ideal anymore in the hopefully post-COVID world that we're moving into. However, we do know that we like doing biography, and we like having these conversations, so we are not going to give up on biography programs, but it will no longer be called Lunch with Friends and Strangers, and we even eaten, so
That's true, yeah.
So we were going to look forward to our announcements for the spring semester on how we do it. I want to thank, of course, Paul Bonici over there working hard to make sure you can see us. I want to thank Jay Harper and Jesse Moorfield here at the music department for their technical help in getting us in this room and whatnot. And of course, our friend Robert Buxton. Thank you so much. This has been so great, and I could hear you playing. Can you take us out with something a little short and sweet? Whatever you want. You can even tell us it could be something entirely different. Whatever you want.
Oh, something short and sweet.
That's a lot of pressure on you.
No, I have something. I just have to. I mean, I could do a short Gershwin if you wanted.
Yeah, let's hear a little short Gershwin. A little treat for all of us, everyone. A little short Gershwin. Thank you for joining us. We're going to take it out with some music. Robert Buxton. Thank you, Robert. Give me some elbow. Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time. Lunch with Friends and Strangers, but it won't be lunch, and we won't be strangers. We'll see you all next time. Thanks so much. Have a good one.